Well, as you know, you probably heard my speech in there, that we said this is very important. We see the Senate election as being particularly important for Western Australia because it raises two issues. One, the carbon tax and the mining tax. And the government's been unable to pass the repeal of the mining and carbon tax because it doesn't have the numbers in the Senate. With the new Senate, Parliament United will have the balance of power. So it rests with us to make sure that the mining tax and the carbon tax gets passed. Also, this election is different than any other election where you've been voting for who will be the government of Australia. We're not doing this occasion. Regardless of the outcome of this election, we know the government won't change, that Tony Abbott will still be the Prime Minister and Bill Shorten will still be the Leader of the Opposition. So this is really about whether or not Western Australia can join the balance of power with us. One of the things we want to be looking at very seriously is the GST question. I can't understand it, how Liberal and Labor politicians from Western Australia decided to send half of Western Australia's GST to other states in Australia. And at the same time, we've seen Western Australia's credit rating decline from AAA to AA. It doesn't make sense. If they still had that GST being paid in Western Australia, the credit rate would most likely be AAA. So they're all contradictions that we can't see. And I think this is a time when Western Australians can vote for us in the balance of power, knowing with confidence that we're fearless and not afraid of anyone, and that we will seek that GST back for Western Australia, and that we do hold the balance of power. So together with Tony Abbott, we're able to decide what should happen in Australia. And one of the things that should happen is that GST should come back to Western Australia. All right, is that a good background? So you ask me any questions if you've got one.
Do you honestly believe that there was some fraud involved in the loss of those votes?
Personally, yeah, I do. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of things that were too coincidental. We just won a senator in Queensland, we just won a senator in Tasmania. If our senator here, D.L. Wank, had won the first count, we saw that the Greens applied for a recount, that was rejected by the Western Australian manager, right? And that went to Canberra, and that he ruled from Canberra that there'd have to be a recount. They then got down to doing the recount to the last 5 ballot boxes, and they already knew what the results of those boxes were. That was just recounting them because they'd been counted in the first election. So if you take the recount where it stopped, and you look at those 5 ballot boxes and take the result and add that to the recount, our candidate gets elected again. So someone knew that, and there's no question that someone removed those ballot boxes because they were there, they were verified by scrutineers, and they had to be removed. So the question arises, who did it? There would have been someone that had a vested interest of ensuring that the people who won the first count weren't reconfirmed in the second count. That's all I can say. I think Kelty says the same thing, really, in a much longer way. So it was either Uri Geller, who was there as a magician, who made them disappear. It was either someone that grabbed them and bolted outside the door, which is highly unlikely with so many people there, or someone may have come back later on because there's no forced entry and opened it with a key and got and removed those boxes. And the question is, who would have had a key? Only officers from the AEC. And I note that once I gave my speech at the National Press Club about this matter, the Electoral Commissioner resigned 2 days later, and the manager for Western Australia also resigned. Now, if they had nothing to worry about, why did they resign? That's how I see it. Yep.
Are you prepared to use your position in the Senate and your support for the repeal of the mining and carbon tax as leverage on the issue of something like the GST?
Yeah, we are, and we think it all comes together, because it all really talks about Western Australia really as a powerhouse of this country. Now, nobody was a stronger campaigner, if you remember, in 2010 about the mining tax. I went around the country very hard saying that this mining tax wouldn't raise any money, which it hasn't, but it would give the perception to overseas people that Western Australia penalises people for success. It would dry up our investment. What's actually happened, it's dried up our investment. And of course, with the carbon tax, it's much the same. Electricity prices have got higher, so if we want to look at manufacturing, if we want to look at anything here, Western Australia is not a good place to do it, or anywhere in Australia actually, right? And I'm a big manufacturer in this country. And when you look at the GST, it's just mind-boggling that Western Australian politicians from the Liberal and Labor parties got together over successive governments and agreed that a large portion of Western Australia's GST wouldn't be spent in Western Australia. How can you do that if you're from Western Australia, your children are here, this is where you want your future? But the reason I think it needs to be corrected is not just because I've got a strong interest in Western Australia, which I have, because I think it's unfair, right? We want to have a country where people do well, it gives people incentive to do well. We don't want to have a country that says that if Western Australia does well, the money has to go to somewhere else. This is not general Commonwealth revenue, let me put it that way. The Commonwealth has got a responsibility to ensure that there's certain standards in all states. The GST was a specific revenue designed for the states to give up a lot of state taxes, which they did, right? And then the deal was that they would have got the GST to compensate them for that. Western Australia, having met that part of the bargain, giving up those taxes, then found that a lot of their GST was going away and they weren't getting their fair reward for what they'd given up. And why did that happen? The reason it happened was because the Liberal Party is primarily controlled from Melbourne and Sydney, and so is the Labor Party. And they wanted to win. There were more seats in Sydney and New South Wales and Victoria federally than there were in Western Australia, so that's what happened.
So just to be clear, you won't support the repeal of those two taxes unless there is GST reform and WA consolidation?
No, that wasn't the question. You said, would I be using that?
So then can I put that question to you?
No, because I want to be able to retain that position when I'm negotiating after June this year. I'm not so stupid as to tell you so that Tony Abbott knows what we're going to do.
But you're putting him on notice that...
We're putting on notice that these are three serious issues, right? These are three all very serious issues for Western Australia, and that Western Australians want something done about it. That's what we're doing now. And we're saying that we're in a stronger position to do something about it if we elect senators from Western Australia. Even though we've got the balance of power now, to have 2 more senators from Western Australia would make that position even stronger. So I'm saying to Western Australians, regardless of who you voted for before, at this particular election, it only makes sense to vote for our party so that Western Australia can have a strong representation in the balance of power in Australia and can actually have some bargaining positions. Alrighty?
Are you concerned about a backlash against micro parties this time around?
Not really. We're not a micro party, I don't think. We've got 3 senators in there, and and Glenn, I got the largest swing in the history of the Commonwealth in the House of Representatives, where I got a 50.3% swing when I stood for the House of Representatives. So I don't know any micro parties that have got that. I don't know any parties, well, no Labor or Liberal parties have ever got a 50.3% swing. And of course, Glenn Lazarus was elected in the Senate in Queensland. He got a primary vote of over 12%, which was much stronger than a lot of Liberal and Labor senators that were elected.
It was a bit disappointing in Tasmania, though. Are you worried that the party's over a bit?
Oh, not really. That was standing. The state party was registered 1 day before the writs closed, 3 weeks before the election, and that's pretty good, I think. And if you look at the swings that happened in that election, we got half the swing that the Liberal Party got. The Liberal Party's been there for 100 years. So, what votes were available to swing were, I think, 21%, and we got nearly 6 or 7% of them. The Liberals got the other 14. So that's an outstanding performance, really, if you're realistically in politics. Like at the last federal election, there was 8% of swinging voters, basically, if you look at the polls. We got 5.6% of them. The Liberals got 1.4% of them. And the reason that Tony Abbott was made Prime Minister was because we gave our preferences to the Liberal Party. Without that, he wouldn't be the Prime Minister of Australia today. So that puts our party in a unique position, that we've got the ability to change governments at both the lower house level at the next election if we want to, if we don't think the government's performing well. And in the upper house, we've got a strong position as to go with legislation, whether we think it should go ahead or not. So I think we're in a unique position. I think we've got a lot to offer the people of Western Australia.
And on the renewable energy target issue, what's the standing there?
Well, we think renewable energy is a good and a laudable thing, but we don't think it should be mandatory, right? We think people should not be forced to spend extra money against their own free will, right? So we think it should really be a situation where the government should encourage it, provide incentives, and leave it up to individuals to make the decision. All right?
Is that not slightly at odds with what D.O. Wayne said the other day?
No, that's what he meant to say. That's what he said. That's what he put out in his press release. If you've got a copy of it, and made it pretty clear.
I thought I read a quote where he said he supported the 20% target as it stood.
No, he didn't say that, and that's just a journo's beat up, I guess. A lot of journos write stories from other stories. A bit lazy sometimes, but that's not the case. He supports the 20% target, But our difference as a party is that it should be a voluntary thing, right? We should encourage people in the community to go for renewable energy. I don't think anyone would disagree with that situation, but we can't compel people to do it, right? It's up to them. And we certainly will be voting for the abolition of the carbon tax and all the legislation that goes with it. Right? Alrighty. Well, thanks very much, everybody. All the best. Thank you.